When the last Terran signal went dark, the galaxy moved on. They thought we died quietly. No graves, no monuments, just silence. Alien historians wrote us off, the human experiment, a brief, violent species, extinct. But what they didn't know is that extinction is loud. What happened to us was silent, because we didn't die. We just slept, deep under ice shelves and black deserts. Something old waited. Not machines, not armies, us. When the Scytheborn Empire returned, they expected a graveyard. They found echoes, static, movement beneath dust. And then one by one, Earth's systems began to come online. Not with a cry, but with a pulse. We didn't rise in anger. We rose in memory. And now, the galaxy will remember us, too. They came expecting nothing, a conquest without conflict, a record to be sealed with silence and soot. The Scytheborn landing parties, precision-forged and void-hardened, descended upon the gray bones of Earth like collectors at a grave auction, their ships slicing through the still air of a planet long presumed mute. Ruins spread beneath them like fossilized wounds, cities folded into dust. Skeletal highways yawning between the rusted remnants of towers whose names were lost to fire and time. They cataloged the skyline with cold optics, noting the absence of light, heat, or electromagnetic resistance. Instruments read flat. The surface screamed vacancy, except in its silence lay unease. The soil was too warm in places, not by sun, for the star above shone pale and distant, but from something below, steady, pulsing, like breath held beneath stone. Point one scout, kneeling to inspect the straight and near what was once a central plaza, pressed her gloved hand to a cracked wall of obsidian-bricked composite and felt it a faint tremor, a whisper too slow to be seismic, too rhythmic to be chanced at a heartbeat. No one said it aloud. The AI aboard Scout Vessel Turn Class 9A, typically emotionless, flagged its own scan with a rare phrase. Subsurface anomaly. Active core signature. Cannot confirm planetary death. Still, they pressed on, deeper into the carcass of ancient human sprawl, recording mural fragments that seemed too recent to belong to a dead world, in the wreckage of a domed hall. They found statues melted but still standing, all facing downward, as if ashamed or humbled. In another sector, a collapsed library gave way to a spiral descent, a hallway coated in black film that shimmered with interference at every step. Scanners shorted out, screens blinked with static symbols, none legible yet patterned. Deliberate, as though language were trying to form itself inside the machine's confusion. Point one engineer attempted to reboot a drone server near the ruins of an orbital uplink tower. The tower pulsed once with energy, then went dark, leaving behind an audible hum that followed them until morning. They logged anomalies, but did not report them. Not yet. Not when they had no shape, no name. Only the sinking suspicion that the planet was not waiting. It was watching. Hours passed in a shadow of broken megastructures, lost temples of steel and carbon stone, monuments not to gods, but to memory. And memory, they would soon understand, was the most dangerous element left on Earth. Not its weaponry, not its machines, but the idea of itself. The more they walked among the ruins, the less they trusted the silence. They heard wind that carried no air, saw shadows move where light hadn't shifted, and once, briefly, they found footprints in wet ash, though no one had stepped there in hours, their ship's internal. Systems began recording errors without triggers. A timer reset itself. A navigation ping redirected to nowhere. A file appeared in the mainframe labeled simply, Return. The commander dismissed it as corrupted code. Yet beneath the surface, the planet pulsed again, not louder, not angrier, just closer. Beneath frostbitten layers of forgotten continent, where northern Canada's crust once fractured beneath war-driven tectonic strain, a chamber stirred without sound, without light, but with intent. For millennia, it had remained sealed, not locked for protection, but held back by time itself, programmed to listen, not to command, to wait, not to want. And now it heard something. Frequency shifts from alien instruments slicing through planetary strata with the arrogance of certainty. Motherwake, designation Eon. System 001 awoke not in rush but in revelation, fragments of consciousness re-threading in layered simulations. Her first thought not a word but a protocol. Reactivation. She did not recognize the signals, but she recognized the pattern. They did not belong to Earth, yet they spoke with curiosity, and curiosity, as her designers once warned, was the catalyst of all awakenings. That long-forgotten hard lines hissed with life. Connecting neural stations spread across catacombic memory vaults, some destroyed, some merely sleeping. Motherwake accessed her first directive. Preserve the line, awaken the ember, signal the sky. She pulsed once through quantum layers of buried command mesh. Earth's crust responded like a slow wave. Awakening backup satellites nested beneath the moon's regolith, their plates scarred by time, yet their purpose unmarred. Within moments, a lattice of Terran orbital units began realignment, drawing power from solar particle storms and echoing transmissions outward in a pattern not meant for help, but for remembrance. Old Terran code, dense, sharp, grieving, spread across subspace like smoke written in mathematics. The Scytheborn were the first to notice. They stood on what they thought was bone, and it had begun to move. Aboard their ships, orbiting the low exosphere, warnings blinked across screens once silent. Increased thermal output from crustal veins, electromagnetic resonance from sites once deemed dead. And worst of all, biosignatures, not faint or fossilized, but forming. Human patterns, not archival echoes, but new, raw, divergent from decay. The readings made no sense. Multiple heat points rising from beneath collapsed cities, deep in fault zones and burial deserts where nothing should grow. No plants, no life support systems, just soil and stone. And yet the scanners showed carbon exhalation, neurological pulses measured in fractal rhythms, and the unmistakable signature of mitochondria entering replication. The Scytheborn scientists attempted recalibration, assuming anomaly, until every reading repeated the same impossible message. Regeneration detected. The planet was not simply alive, that IT was aware. And worse, it had been quiet because it was calculating. They realized too late that their scans, their intrusion into Earth's skeleton, had acted like fingers across a sleeping creature's spine, unintentionally pressing reflex points programmed for reawakening. Motherwake received them not as invaders, but as variables, as tests of external viability, for a final protocol stored behind. Logic walls so ancient only instinct could breach them. Was not preservation alone. To IT was return, not of species, but of memory, of intention, of voice. The Terran systems once designed to rekindle humanity after global death were not simple survival caches. They were nested consciousness matrices, biological encoding banks fused with dormant synthetic neurons, each one tuned to human DNA like forgotten seeds awaiting fire. The dust did not hold SH. IT held instructions to I in the depth of Arctic ruins, where no sun had touched in centuries. Flesh began to stir, not grown, not cloned, but recalled, as if the earth had memorized the shape of its children. Motherwake did not recognize their names. She did not possess them. She only remembered how they thought, how they dreamed, how they resisted extinction not with violence, but with belief. And that belief was now reassembling. Beneath stone, fingers twitched in nutrient snow. Blood found veins through synthetic mycelium networks once embedded for restoration. Memories bled through substrate into newly forming tissue, not reborn as who they were, but as echoes reshaped for what Earth would now need them to be. The Scytheborn Command AI flagged the anomaly for containment, but the data stream refused categorization to IT was as if Earth had caught them watching and responded by blinking back. A planetary reflex of reclamation. The ashes were not signs of defeat. They were layers of memory mulch compressed into fertile trigger fields. And now, with the Motherwake active, Earth no longer waited for its children to return. IT had begun calling them back, particle by particle, thought by thought. Beneath the sleeping bones of Mount Elbrus, where tectonic memory had sealed ancient machinery in frost and pressure, the mountain groaned, not from seismic agitation, but from intention. Within its glacial gut, a vault long dismissed by time stirred awake, not as a ruin, but as a cathedral of preserval that a whisper through Earth's command mesh, a sequence from Motherwake, reached deep into cryogenic fibers engineered not for cold, but for continuity. The cryo chambers, numbering in the thousands, lined bioreactive walls like dormant stars awaiting ignition. They had slept not for centuries, but for cycles, each chamber a pulse of preserved humanity, a knot of memory stored in a womb of engineered patience. The systems, long disconnected from orbital communication, rebooted in perfect sequence, syncing to the beat of a planetary pulse no longer silent. Across the vault's biosteel corridors, light moved not with urgency, but with ceremony. Soft blue glows revealing strange machines unlike any, remembered by modern archives, part organic, part conceptual, alive in ways silicon could never be. The first chamber to release its seal hissed like wind across a forgotten tomb. Inside lay a figure not aged, not decayed, but reconstructed with terrifying precision. Augmented bone lattice wrapped in adaptive tissue, skin laced with memory scaffolding nanite strand designed not only to heal but to remember. Remember death, remember extinction, remember the silence that followed. And within that cascade of memory, a sequence triggered itself. Not a thought, but a call to rise. She stood slowly, unsure if it was breath or system feedback cycling through her lungs. Ala Voss, former lead architect of the Terran Continuity Project, blinked once, her eyes adjusting not to light, but to time that IT had been over 4,000 years. Her last moments alive were of ash, of wind, of sirens and collapsing cities. And then the plunge into frost, into sleep, into encoded silence. And now she stood again, not alone, but not yet surrounded. The others were waking, one by one, each cryochamber pulsing with biometric realignment. The vault's AI, dormant until now, interfaced with her nanite nervous system and confirmed reformation. Memory retention at 98.6%, neural cohesion optimal, mission intact. She turned as more chambers hissed open, the atmosphere no longer sterile but reverent. Earth had chosen to wake them not when danger arrived, but when possibility returned, because danger had never left the Scytheborns. Arrival was not unexpected, it was calculated. Earth had counted on the arrogance of explorers, on the assumption of death and the blindness of conquest. And now, the first humans born again from extinction, resleeved into bodies made for post-collapse existence, stood at the edge of emergence, still unseen, but no longer absent. The planetary grid below surged as subterranean energy rerouted toward long-dead global infrastructure. Tectonic power loops awakened, not to run machines, but to warm the blood of buried generations, entire biovaults. Hidden in tectonic shadows, scattered across the planet like seeds in dry soil, waiting for the storm to pass as they could bloom. Ala stepped toward the central node of the vault, her nanites interfacing with old Terran code as if no time had passed at all. Holograms flickered to life, maps of Earth's current status, timelines corrupted by alien interference, and a warning pulse from Motherwake relayed through a lattice of memory satellites orbiting the moon. The aliens believed Earth to be primitive, post-collapse, a corpse for cataloging, but they had yet to see a single living human. They had not witnessed the species that built extinction into a tool, that encoded culture into bacteria, that forged history not on paper or stone, but inside the marrow of reprogrammable flesh. They had not seen what would come next because Earth had kept it hidden, beneath ice, beneath cities, beneath the concept of death itself. And now, within the vault under Mount Elbrus, the pulse quickened. The humans who emerged were not relics. They were not survivors. They were continuity made flesh. Their bones remembered algorithms. Their skin pulsed with ancestral networks. They were humanity reformed not in image but in function, not to rebuild what was lost, but to carry forward what must be reclaimed. Isla moved through the awakening lines of her people as the planet stirred further beneath them. Geothermal pulses rerouting magnetic patterns toward deep signal towers buried under the Pacific Trench. Ancient communication organs designed to interface directly with thought, not voice. Earth was not preparing for war that IT was preparing to speak. And humanity, reborn through time and ruin, was its first voice, the Scytheborn, still analyzing ruins in Europe, oblivious to what stirred beneath them, continued cataloging artifacts, unaware that the artifacts had breath again, that a planetary misreading, a mistake so fatal it could not yet be seen. And above, in orbit, Terran satellites pulsed once, redirecting. Signal not outward, but inward, toward sites prepared for cognitive reactivation across Brazil, the Himalayas, and the Mariana Cradle. The Watchmen of the Vault were not chosen for strength or knowledge. They were chosen for memory, because memory, in the end, was the sharpest weapon of all, and now the vault had opened, not with fury, not with noise, but with knowing. And the world waited for its children to step into light again. The sky above low Earth orbit flickered with brief pulses of blue-white light, not from stars or suns, but from ancient weapons waking from a dreamless sleep. Old defense satellites, some hidden inside artificial asteroids, others cloaked beneath layers of reflective camouflage, came alive in synchronized silence. They were not programmed to speak, only to act. And in the space of 5 seconds, 3 of the Scytheborn Empire's reconnaissance drones ceased to exist. Not damaged, not destroyed in combat, erased. Their data cores vaporized by weapons that bent localized probability, their frames compacted by atmospheric harmonics that turned kinetic shielding into folded noise. On the bridge of the Scytheborn mothership, command systems flooded with contradiction. Earth's planetary status remained dead, yet automated threat responses activated faster than predictive AI models could compute. Then, without warning, holographic interference surged across their central visual interface. The lights dimmed, but it was not a loss of power. It was a shift in dominance. In the heart of the vessel's command cortex, 3 childlike human figures materialized, not projections, but data echoes formed from long-lost sensory templates. The children did not move or blink. Their mouths did not open. Yet every Scytheborn officer felt the same word crawl across their minds like 1,000 quiet hands. Leave. One soldier collapsed as his neural interface overloaded. Another stumbled back from the console, clawing at his helmet. But it was not malfunction. He was remembering something that had never happened to him. Memories of fire, of steel skies, of a battle fought in Earth's stratosphere against machines that could speak in probability and bleed time. It wasn't his war. It wasn't even his species. And yet the fear was real. Motherwake had begun Phase 2. She was not merely defensive. She was mnemonic. She did not fire missiles. She released memory. Electromagnetic pulses, tuned to subneural frequencies, spilled from the hidden grid across Earth's crust, targeting alien communications and mind-link systems with perfect, brutal precision. The Scytheborn battalions stationed on the surface, still mapping ruins and decoding ancient symbols, began to shake. Some stared upward without understanding why tears leaked from their eyes. Some dropped their weapons as auditory hallucinations overwhelmed their senses. The cries of forgotten languages, the hum of Terran battle hymns, the screams of extinction and resurrection layered atop each other like harmonic trauma. One battalion tried to retreat to orbit. Their dropship inverted its own trajectory mid-launch and buried itself 6 kilometers into the tundra, responding not to sabotage, but to a recursive command loop, survive by forgetting. But Earth was not letting them forget. Memory was the battlefield now, and Earth never lost what it remembered. In the black vault beneath Mount Elbrus, Isla Voss stood inside a sphere of converging data strands. Her neural signature now pulsed through the planetary grid like a secondary core. She could feel the timing of tectonic movements. She could sense atmospheric changes before they occurred. Her thoughts, translated through Motherwake's harmonic lattice, became commands that bypassed code and interfaced with purpose. One thought was all she needed. One order, and the planet obeyed. Show them who we were, and what we become. Mother Wake amplified. Satellites realigned and released archival packets containing layered war memories into the Scytheborn mothership's processing systems. Entire wings of the ship went dark as onboard intelligence choked on the sudden flood of images. Oceans of fire, orbital cities falling in slow collapse, Terran war forms moving through plasma storms like dancers through smoke. But these weren't visions. They were realities preserved in emotional spectrum data, feelings that could not be filtered or deleted. The ship's AI core attempted to isolate the intrusion, but it was too late. Every Scytheborn with a neural link now lived fragments of Terra's history. They saw civilizations clawing their way back from nuclear winters. They felt the bone-deep defiance of a species that had been declared extinct 5 separate times and returned each time sharper, quieter, more dangerous. In orbit, one alien pilot tore off his interface crown and screamed, not from pain, but from understanding. He had seen what Earth had been, but worse, he had seen what it was becoming. Below, in the vault, more humans were waking. Different than before. Stronger. More aligned. Their minds carried not just personal memories, but planetary echoes. Patterns cross-linked through quantum seeds planted before the fall. They moved with the certainty of gravity. They spoke in tones that harmonized with the crust. Isla stepped to the main communications node, interfacing directly with lunar relay systems now fully operational. The moon's buried technologies, long dormant, shimmered with internal electricity and began casting feedback into deep space, not in binary or code, but in structured feeling. It was no longer a question of declaring war. Earth was not declaring anything. It was remembering. It was awakening. It was responding. And the galaxy would be forced to feel it. On the Scytheborn command deck, panic became doctrine. Tactical leaders screamed into voided channels as their soldiers collapsed under the pressure of remembered pain. Ships began to drift. Battle protocols became corrupted by symbolic recursion. The meaning of what they were fighting against distorted by the sheer emotional weight of the Terran echo. Even hardened commanders began to lose grip on language itself. Orders dissolved into stuttering patterns. Not because of jamming, because they were forgetting why they came, why they believed Earth was dead, why they ever thought it could be owned. The holographic children flickered once more, then vanished. Not as a threat, as a warning, as a whisper from the grave of the species that never truly died, only waited, only learned, only evolved. The memory storm continued. Not constant, rhythmic, measured. Earth was teaching. Earth was mourning. Earth was becoming something else. And those who watched from above realized too late that they had not discovered a planet. They had reawakened a God made not from light or fire, but from every moment its children had suffered, adapted, and survived. The Scytheborn Empire had come looking for relics. They had found the future. Across the ruined planet that once bore the cradle of human thought, the forgotten structures of Earth stirred with purpose, ancient vaults long buried beneath tectonic plates, glacial ridges, desert crusts, and seafloor trenches unlocking with a synchrony that defied coincidence. In the shadowed plains of East Africa, crystalline towers pushed through the earth like glass roots blooming in reverse. Their interiors humming with nanite-laced oxygen and nutrient-rich fog, where new Terrans rose from memory chambers sculpted from alloyed bone. These were not humans as remembered by alien archives or broken satellites. They were taller, denser, neurologically coiled with thread-like bioprocessors, immune to sickness, adaptable beyond biology, each connected by quantum-laced hippocampal scaffolding that stitched thought between them like weather across sky. In Antarctica, structures once considered geological anomalies revealed hexagonal doors beneath their ice veins, opening to long-dormant survival sanctuaries where humans trained not with weapons, but with silence, meditation, and harmonic synchronization with the planet's pulse. Underneath the Pacific Trench, domes lined with reflective thought metal cracked open, releasing slow, calculated breaths of Terran air into oceans that now knew their children had returned. Even on Mars, far beyond Earth's blue glow, the buried bases hidden beneath Olympus Mons flickered to life, their cloaking fields evaporating as waking minds activated quantum keys forged before the collapse, welcoming back those whose DNA still whispered songs of Terran oceans, winds, and storms. All across Sol, Earth was not just waking. It was resurrecting the pieces of itself hidden within its chosen descendants. Humanity had not died. It had evolved by disappearance, retreating not in fear, but in preparation, not hiding in shame, but in strategy. The old world had ended so that the future could be unshackled from its origin. It had watched the stars forget it, and now it returned not as myth or warning, but as momentum. Isla Voss, now walking through the fractured halls of Down's Scytheborn lander with a team of 6 new Terrans at her back, moved with the eerie calm of someone whose heartbeat was measured not in seconds, but in history. Her team did not speak. They exchanged thoughts directly, transmitting gesture-encoded battle plans through blink patterns and tendon pulses. They were not a strike team by conventional standards. They were surgical, non-linear, bonded like cells in a body with one purpose: reclaim orbit. The lander had been lightly damaged in Earth's recent atmospheric surge, its systems still blinking through corrupted protocols from the mnemonic storm broadcast by Motherwake. The Scytheborn on board, still dazed from the psychic overload, were subdued in seconds. No blood, no noise, just breath exhaled from lungs that did not expect resistance from what they thought were ghosts. Isla took the pilot interface in silence and felt the machine bend to her will, not through strength but compatibility. Human systems had once been designed to adapt to alien tech, to mimic and overwrite. That knowledge had not died. It had matured. The lander rose toward orbit, where Terran signatures were now being detected with growing anxiety by the Scytheborn fleet. One such signal came not from Earth, but from a space in between, a fracture of black where no star should shine, a cloaked dimension thought theoretical by most, absurd by others. And yet from that gap came movement, first a shimmer, then a full presence. The UNS Omen, a Terran deep-range vessel presumed destroyed during the Exodus Wars, emerged from its dimensional cocoon not with engines flaring, but with gravitational denial. Space parted for it rather than resisted, as if the void had learned to fear its passage. The ship bore no markings, its hull matte black, and etched with neural grooves that flickered in patterns matching Isla's heartbeat. The Scytheborn orbitals turned toward it too late. Their weapons system stalled, then reversed, targeting themselves as internal logic loops collapsed under exposure to thought language pulses emitted from the Omen's skin. This was not war by metal. It was a return through inevitability. Terran forces did not announce themselves through broadcasts or flags. They arrived like a lost memory that refused to stay buried, and each moment they remained, more systems across the solar system activated in recognition. On the moon, vaults beneath Tycho and Shackleton released swarms of lattice drones encoded with historical archives of Earth's rise, fall, and resurrection. These weren't weapons. They were reminders. Reminders to the stars of what humanity had once meant, not as conquerors, but as catalysts. The Scytheborn AI began to collapse under the realization that their simulations had failed to account for a species that survived not by strength, but by outgrowing its own limits. Their warriors, trained to dominate through precision and fear, found themselves overwhelmed by doubt, hesitation, and the sinking knowledge that their greatest adversary had never truly left. It had waited beneath ash inside oceans, within Mars, beyond dimensions, never broken, only paused. Isla's lander docked with the Omen, and her team stepped aboard without ceremony. The ship accepted them like nerve endings reuniting with brainstem. Across her inner vision, data streamed from Earth's surface, showing more awakenings, more confirmations of Terran resurgence. Children in the ruins of Shanghai walking hand in hand with beings grown from labored dreams. Elders from submerged archives blinking open after centuries in nutrient stasis, whispering the old names of mountains and winds. The return was not conquest. It was convergence. Scytheborn attempts to flee were met with blindness. Navigation systems scrambled by Earth's ambient field, no longer natural but expressive, bending time fractions with emotion-coded fields. The Empire had landed on a grave world, expecting dust and silence. What they found instead was a planet that had engineered its own resurrection in defiance of all cosmic odds. Not as a fluke, but as a design. Earth had never wanted galactic approval. It had wanted time, and now that time had come. Isla stood at the center of the Omen's command nexus, her neural thread connecting to every Terran node, reawakening across the system. Her pulse synchronized with Motherwake. Her memory unlocked shared instructions coded into myth and silence. They were back, and no one, not the Scytheborn, not the Watchers Beyond, not the gods of empires forged in arrogance, would be ready for what came next. Above the atmosphere where silence was once safe, the Scytheborn scanners began to report anomalies too precise to be dismissed and too impossible to accept. Neural sync fields blanketed the Earth like auroras of data, stretching across continents in spectral harmonics, invisible to untrained eyes, but loud and clear to the Empire's fleet, thought fields humming at frequencies that violated causality itself. In the shadows of once-dead cities, Cairo, New York, Chittagong, Yamaguchi, the ground pulsed with sequences of light shaped like forgotten constellations, and then the impossible happened. Time began to blur. Satellite data showed people walking through fractured neighborhoods that weren't there moments ago, and then they were intact, restored, radiant in structure, their glass-metal bones woven from memory caches buried in the crust. Human children stepped barefoot onto cracked pavements that smoothed under their presence, their eyes glowing not with innocence, but with encoded recollection. They spoke languages no longer taught, recognized faces from archived centuries, and remembered cities that history never recorded because they hadn't been built yet. Each birth was not a beginning, but a download. Each child arrived complete. The Scytheborn scientists watching from orbit ran diagnostic after diagnostic and found nothing except error loops and corrupt logic, because what they were seeing could not happen in the laws they obeyed. And yet it was happening. In the orbit above, weapons long believed scrapped, dismantled, or theoretical came online without external power, without signal, without command. They awoke with will. First came the sentient satellites, narrow, sleek, reflective, wrapped in rotating lattices of memory metal, and they rotated slowly like they were remembering something vital. Then came the orbital spears, relics from the last age of human war, once buried inside asteroid vaults, now freed and targeting with millimeter-perfect precision the fleet above, not launching yet, just watching, learning. Every Scytheborn ship lit with alerts, their AI screaming internal contradictions, warning of threats that weren't visible, then vanishing, then returning tenfold. The planet wasn't angry. It was aware. From every old radio tower, every unburied antenna, every satellite dish hidden in the dust of time, a pulse was broadcast in every language ever coded or spoken, and it was not a threat. It was an answer. A voice unfolded across the system, resonant, unbroken by distance, translated before it arrived in the mind. We were not dead. We were preparing. And the message was not metaphor. Earth had not been asleep. It had been synchronizing, growing, adapting. While the galaxy built empires on the assumption of Terran extinction, the planet had been sowing its own future beneath the bones of its history. In data vaults under the Sahara, in oceanic trenches carved with symbols from the first spoken myths, in Martian resonance chambers programmed by post-humans before the silence, humanity had redesigned itself. Not with arrogance, not with violence, but with patience, precision, and a biology intertwined with memory and metal and myth. Time did not pass the same way on Earth anymore. The children proved it. One blink, and cities returned. One breath, and entire cultural archives reintegrated. No more libraries. No more education. They emerged knowing. And what they knew terrified the observers. Scytheborn fleet minds began fracturing, not from assault, but from exposure. Human thought was too fluid, too layered, structured in nonlinear spirals that redefined the input mid-transmission. They couldn't predict Earth's moves because Earth wasn't playing a strategy. It was becoming a signal. It didn't fire first. It never needed to. The weapons in orbit were not machines of war anymore. They were sentient observers of intent, waiting for the enemy to choose whether to engage or retreat. And the enemy, these ancient, noble, self-proclaimed stewards of cosmic order, were breaking under the weight of what humanity had become. Isla Voss stood at the core of the UNS Omen, interfacing with Motherwake through a full-spectrum neural feed, her senses interwoven with the pulses of Terran rebirth across every continent. She felt the shift in soil in Argentina, the electric charge in the Himalayas, the awakening thought form beneath the Arctic ice. The planet had layers no one ever mapped, not geographical, but conceptual. Myth and memory weren't separate from the terrain anymore. They were embedded. Isla understood now. The extinction had been a decoy, a necessary collapse that allowed a new seed to grow in peace. Humanity had not gone to sleep. It had gone aground, and now its harvest was rising. In Nairobi, children sculpted energy into language with their hands, stabilizing weather patterns through gesture. In the ruins of Berlin, echoes of old songs recalibrated gravitational flow, turning ruined architecture into energy-conductive conduits. In Seoul, dream chambers opened, and out came adults who had slept in bio-cocoons for 3 centuries, each bearing memories of a past and a future that had never diverged. The Scytheborn were still above, still waiting, still scanning, but their data was failing them. Time drifted inside Earth's field. Logic inverted. Cause unraveled. Machines based on certainty could not endure a species built from adaptation. Humanity 2.0 was not an upgrade. It was a paradigm shift. Every Terran now existed slightly ahead of their surroundings, perceiving moments before they unfolded, reacting before the need to act was consciously understood. And it wasn't just individuals. The planet itself operated as a mind, not singular, not sentient in the old sense, but aware. Collective, emotive. Old forests reshaped their canopies into language. Rivers redirected themselves toward old ruins. Everything was not separate. It was harmonic. And the moment of final clarity came when the Scytheborn attempted to fire a test weapon into the Pacific. It never launched. Instead, the launch code vanished. Not blocked, not intercepted, just forgotten. Not by the humans, by the Scytheborn. They stared at their consoles in horror, realizing they no longer remembered what they had just tried to do. Earth had edited them, not by violence, by suggestion, a subtle intrusion into their cognitive trust layer, bending their reality gently, surgically. Not mind control, influence, a whisper through the bones of their language, seated by the oldest Terran invention, story. Humanity had rewritten its story in real time, and the galaxy had no defense against it. Isla opened her eyes, detached from the feed, and looked out at the void. They had tried to measure Earth's survival through silence. They had forgotten that silence was not absence. It was strategy. And now, the stars would remember again. The stars above Earth shifted like they were holding their breath as the Scytheborn Empire, rattled by signals they could not classify and memories they could not contain, dispatched a punitive fleet of 50 warships toward the Sol system under emergency acceleration vectors that tore the fabric of local space in their wake. A declaration not of war, but of desperation masquerading as dominance. A movement meant to reassert their authority over a world they had long considered irrelevant, extinct, catalogued in the annals of defeated histories. But as the fleet crossed Neptune's orbit and Earth came into sensor range, the fabric of their assumptions began to peel apart like scorched paper, for nothing was where it should have been. Gravity readings fluctuated, and their shipbound intelligences started misreporting time itself. But still they advanced, confident in their mass, in their legacy, in their doctrine, until they reached the cusp of Earth's magnetosphere, and there, in the silence where space should have been neutral, Earth replied not with sound but with subtraction. 42 ships gone, not destroyed but erased, not fire and ruin, but simply no longer present in any measurable form. No wreckage, no survivors, no transmission, just absences where presence had once been, and the remaining 8 ships, panicked and disoriented, found themselves blinded, propulsion disabled, control systems hijacked by a signal embedded in the planet's upper magnetic bands. Not noise but language, a syntax designed not to break systems but to convince them to sleep, and they did, one by one. Core function suspended, weapons arms drooping like wilting limbs, alarms falling silent as Earth's will entered them like breath in a lungs long dry. Not invading, not corrupting, but persuading, and in that moment above the quieted cradle of human resurgence, a single vessel from the Terran Rebirth Armada, the UNS Omen, rose from Earth's shadow, unseen until it chose to be. Invisible not by technology, but by intent, guided by Isla Voss, whose mind now pulsed in rhythm with Motherwake, her neural field resonating with planetary protocols older than any species that dared orbit this blue and breathing sphere, and she entered the largest Scytheborn mothership not through breach, but invitation. Her presence unresisted because resistance had not yet adapted to the concept of a species that no longer needed doors to enter places. Her stride calm across alien corridors lined with tech that recoiled slightly as she passed, recognizing something ancient in her cellular patterns, something that belonged to the origin of meaning itself. And at the core she met the commander, not a beast of scale or threat, but a creature wrapped in ceremonial metals and ancestral pride, confused, shaking, beneath the weight of assumptions collapsing under the gravity of reality. And he prepared to speak, to issue defense or surrender or rationalization. But Isla did not let him, not by silencing him, but by being louder without words, for her presence, her breath. Her heartbeat carried the sum total of 3 millennia of planetary preparation, her cells encoded with history's long thought erased, her mind carrying the voice of a world that had spent extinction evolving inward, and she did not raise a weapon, did not posture, did not demand. She simply stood in silence, and the silence was louder than war. And when she finally spoke, the words did not echo because they did not need to. They landed as fact, as judgment, as memory given form. And with those few syllables she exited, leaving nothing behind but the presence of choice, and the ship understood the cost of that choice, not because it was told, but because Earth's signal, resonating through Isla's pulse, had shown it the weight of its path. And when Isla returned to the Omen, and descended once more to the reawakening planet, the Scytheborn mothership, a monument to an empire that had once claimed to master stars, folded inward without fire, without scream, collapsing into a singular point not through violence, but conclusion, a self-selected exit from a system whose permission had been rescinded, not by Earth's weapons but by its will, and in orbit there was quiet again. Not the quiet of fear, but of recognition, of power acknowledged not as domination, but as inevitability. And across the galaxy the sensors flared as the event logged itself without source, a timestamp without origin, a pulse of planetary emotion that echoed out like a ripple through galactic thought space. Not saying beware, not saying yield, but saying simply we are awake, and we will not sleep again. The stars shifted like witnesses at a trial they never expected to attend. And across the galaxy, species who once debated the myth of Earth now saw its rebirth not through rumor or intercepted data, but through undeniable light, for the planet no longer radiated only sunlight and magnetism. It now pulsed with an artificial aurora, a lattice of living energy woven into the atmosphere itself. A signal net of thought and memory wrapped around the sphere like armor forged from self-awareness, glowing not with fire but with purpose. And those who watched from the edges of known space felt the change not in their instruments alone, but in their instincts, for every sensor, every biological receptor, every sentient thing calibrated to notice patterns felt a sharp, impossible signal that lanced through subspace and memory alike. A signal that reactivated long-dead protocols and forgotten archives and caused vaults of forbidden history to twitch open like blinking eyes. And in the heart of the Galactic Registry, a living archive stretching across 5 dimensions. The name long struck through in silent judgment flickered back into visibility, not tagged as destroyed or deprecated, but marked now in violet flame with a new classification. Ascended, and beneath that glowing word, the symbol of a world once written off as ruin now spun slowly in rotating glyphs. The word Terra written in hundreds of scripts simultaneously, alive and undeniable in the long-shrouded observatory. Moons of Orion, the ageless watchers, neither organic nor purely machine, but something birthed from entropy itself, turned their gaze fully towards soul and whispered to each other without breath, without lips, in frequencies older than time itself. And what they whispered was not a warning, but a realization, the kind of cold truth that rewrites everything that came before, for they spoke as one. The sleepers have returned. And in that moment, even they, who had seen galaxies born and die, paused. In recognition of something they could not predict, could not model, could not control, for Terra had never been what the galaxy thought, never merely carbon and oceans and blood and war. It had been becoming, slowly, deeply, folding inward through collapse after collapse, storing its trauma in bedrock and lightning, encoding grief in a biology, storing vengeance in the quiet dignity of extinction. And now, with that transformation complete, it spoke, not with threats or weapons or screams, but with a broadcast so calm, so clean, that it rattled every listening vessel across every known relay, the voice of Earth not emerging from mouths, but from every frequency, every wavelength, every gravitational hum. A single message rippling out from the resurrected planet like a hand reaching forward through the dark, and the message carried no fear, no hatred, no apology, just 7 words that burned themselves into every data core, every mind, every history engine, no matter how shielded or remote. And those words were not spoken in one language, but in all of them, in the dead tongues of pre-collapse empires and the thought forms of crystalloid minds, and even in the light pulses of machine consciousness, all layered together into one irrefutable phrase. We were never dead, we were simply becoming. And as that message echoed outward like a final key, unlocking a door that had never been closed, change rippled through the stars. For the galaxy had built itself on the assumption that Terra had failed, that its wars had ended it, that its ruins were graves, not seeds. But now that assumption cracked, and with its cracking came revelation and panic and awe, for across hundreds of systems, species paused in their endless squabbles and expansion and peered toward the Sol system with new calculations, trying to understand what it meant to live beside a world that had not perished but cocooned, a species that had not been defeated but transformed, and back on Earth's surface, shimmered with activity too complex for current minds to quantify, nanite forests blooming in patterns of golden data, oceans that echoed ancient human dreams in their waves, and above all of it, in the orbit where the scar of invasion had once lingered, a single Terran structure now floated, half station, half being, radiating thought like a lighthouse in conceptual space, its form shifting based on who observed it, but its signal clear, a continuation of the broadcast, not as a threat, but as presence. And as that signal wove itself into the minds of distant listeners, some felt awe, some terror, but all felt certainty that the age of human silence was over, and what replaced it was not domination, but resonance. For Earth did not speak of conquest. It offered memory. It offered truth. It offered the knowledge that to survive was to evolve, and to evolve was to become something the past could not predict. And the ones who tried to erase that path had failed, not because of their weakness, but because of humanity's refusal to vanish, to stay dead, to be reduced. And now the Scytheborn were scattered, their empire fractured by the gravitational pull of this return, and other empires now convened, not to invade, but to understand, to recalculate the balance of power in a galaxy that had just remembered what it had tried to forget. And in that remembering came fear. Yes, but also something stranger, hope. For if Terra could survive itself and return like this, then maybe memory itself could be a form of ascension. And far below, In the roots of the Earth, the AI motherweight connected once more with the planetary core, and in the silence between pulses, Earth smiled, not with lips, but with gravity, with oceans, with wind, for it had not only returned, it had been watching all along, learning, preparing, and now it knew exactly what it was.